Okay, Year 6, good morning and welcome to your last remote learning English lesson for hopefully ever. So today we're going to look at World War One poetry and you are going to have a go at continuing a very famous World War One poem, which I think you looked at last week as well. There was a time I used to smile, used to run and skip and not wonder why, but those days have been over for a while. Now I only quiver and scream and cry. I shake and tremble like a dying leaf, a terrified puppy amongst the already dead. The guns glare at me from their dirty sheaths, but I bury my head and cry instead. A whistle is heard amongst the blasts, and the living dead begin to run. A tremendous bang explodes at last, and it seems to me my life is done. Now just have a pause here of this lesson and see if you can spot any of the features that we've been looking at this week for our poems. So we've got rhyming couplets. You can see that we've got things like smile and while, and then you've got, if I change my colour, you can see that Y and cry rhyme. Now we've got kind of a what we would call assonance, where it's a near rhyme, leaf and sheaves or sheafs, okay? And then we have got dead and instead, okay? And then we've got blasts and lasts, and we've got run and done. So even though they're not spelt in the same pattern, they're still rhyming couplets, okay? We've got an onomatopoeia. Did we spot the onomatopoeic word? Bang sounds like what it is. Yeah, we've got some adjectives. It's not just a bang, it's a tremendous bang. And the living dead. Can you get living dead? What do they mean by the living dead? What type of phrase is that? We've got a simile, like a dying leaf. We've got a terrified puppy. Now that's a metaphor because they aren't actually puppies. They didn't have the puppies fighting in the war. They're talking about the soldiers being like puppies. Okay? So there's quite a few features in that poem already. So we've got Dulce et Decorum est, is what's called for short, and you've done this last week. So, how sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country. What does it mean? Do you think it's being serious, or do you think it might be what we'll call a bit sarcastic, and why do you think that? Okay, we're going to continue on the next slide, but I just want you to think about what that poem actually means. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our own poem like Dulce et Decorum est. Okay, so we've read it first and we've spotted some of the features, but you're going to start or end each of your, now this is wrong, isn't it? It said paragraph. What do we call a part of a poem? We call it a stanza, don't we? So straight away, well done to all of those who spotted that mistake, put in there deliberately to try and fool you. You're going to start each verse or end each verse or stanza with Dulce et Decorum est pro patria mori. Now it's Latin and it means how sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country. That was the title of the poem. That's what Dulce et Decorum est means, okay? So it's up to you. You can either write the Latin if you're feeling brave, or you can write how sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country. So you're going to get your own repetition in there straight away, either by putting it at the end or at the beginning of every stanza, okay? I'd like you to continue. I've put, each group has a different amount of lines that I would like to write. So I think red group have 8, yellow group might have 6, blue group I think have got 4, and I think green group have got 2. And I would just like you to continue, but I really want you to think about what devices you could use, what poetic features you could use. We've got similes, metaphors, personification, alliteration you could have. We've got rhyming as well in that first one. I'm gonna give some rhyming a go, okay? So just a little bit about the poet who wrote Dulce et Decorum est. So he was born in 1893 and he was inspired to enlist after visiting the wounded in hospital. So he joined the army in 1915, so that's just after World War One started, so World War One was 1914. He was injured and sent home in 1917, but then that didn't stop him because he went back a year later and returned to the front line to fight. He was 25 when he died, so he wasn't very old at all, year 6. And he was killed by a machine gun fire on the 4th of November. His parents received news of his death the same day that the bells rung out to celebrate the end of the war. So a week after he died, his parents found out, and actually the war was over then. So he narrowly missed out on surviving the war, which I think is quite sad. So here's just a bit of background to help you write this poem. Wilfred Owen used to write poetry, which he sent home to his mum, okay? And in October 1917, so not that long before he died, you think he died in maybe a year later, something like that, and he sent this Dulce et Decorum est. And he meant for the title to cause shock amongst people back home who believed that the war was noble and glorious. So he wanted people to realise that actually it wasn't a noble way to die. It was terrifying, it was difficult, it was traumatic, it was painful. He didn't want them to think that it was a brave and noble thing to do. He wanted them to know how awful it actually was. Is there any other reasons? Could you think why else he might want to do this? I know with the poem How to Die that we looked at on Tuesday, my class in school talked about how actually it wasn't right for them to die, and they weren't allowed to cry or show any emotion, and that they had to have this stiff upper lip we talked about, and that wasn't right. So maybe that could link in as well. So, what or who is the stanza describing? Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of disappointed shells that dropped behind them. Who do you think that's describing? Thinking about drunk with fatigue, so they're drunk on tiredness, they're so tired. It talks about limping and bloodshot and disappointed shells, so shells that have missed them. So who might he be talking about here? Who's going to be in the thick of that war? Okay, and we've got the next one. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim, through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. Who do you think he's talking about there? Is there actually a green sea? What do they mean by the green sea? Think about the first sentence in that poem, the first line. Gas, gas. And then they've talked about a green sea. What might that green sea be? In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. So looking at that last line, plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. Why do you think he wanted people back at home to know that it wasn't noble? What was happening actually in the trenches of that war? If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear, at every jolt, the blood come gargling from the fourth corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. So let's just look at that last verse together. It's talking about actually if you could see the wagon that we have to fling his half-dead body in from this gas, and that he's writhing in pain, that he's coughing up blood, that his lungs sound broken, that it's as crazy, obscene, it's disgusting as cancer, and it's like vile, incurable sores on tongues of innocent people. So these men have done nothing wrong. They were just enlisted to fight for their country. Okay? He says you wouldn't tell children, you wouldn't say how great it is to fight in this war and how noble it is and how sweet it is to die, because the actual death, from what Wilfred Owen has described in this poem is anything other than sweet. Okay, so who is he having a go at there? Who's he telling? Don't tell them that that's what it is. Is it his mum? Is it everybody who's back home? What do you think? So we're not going to do these creator storyboards. What I want you to focus on is the green. Rewrite the poem, but we're not rewriting it as a story. You've got your own task on your assignment, okay? So I want you to use not paragraphs, stanzas, varied punctuation, and those poetic techniques, okay? And you have your different number of lines. I'd really like you to give maybe rhyming a go if you could. Maybe you could write one that rhymes and one that doesn't, okay?